Welcome to session on thesis format. Thesis format. This is part of the course. Research methodology. Thesis format. What is the format of the thesis? So why you have to study thesis format? See, don't wait for knowing the format of the thesis till the end, because it acts as a skeleton, it acts as a framework for the work you have to do. So try to know the format of the thesis at the beginning itself, so that you can plan your work accordingly. What is the thesis format? So general format of the thesis, it usually starts with the cover page and then declaration by a student. So remember, it may vary from university to university. You have to take care. So cover page, declaration by a student, certificates, both internal and external if any. Certificates, internal certificate will be there, external certificate depending on where you have done the work. You may have to attach more certificates. And then the acknowledgements, the routine process where you acknowledge all the people who contributed, who helped you in the process of doing the thesis work. Abstract, which gives a glimpse of what you are doing, and then the contents, followed by list of tables, list of figures, abbreviations, nomenclature, etc. So usually from up to this point, you will be using Roman letters. On the cover page, you will not be printing any page number. On the remaining page, you will be printing the page numbers. So all the page numbers start from page 1, that is cover page, and up to this nomenclature, there will be Roman numbers. And then followed by chapters, detailed description of the chapters, sections, chapter title, sections, etc. So you are going to write, and then the references. Arabic letters are used here for numbering. But usually references will not have any number. That is avoided generally, but chapters will have it. Okay, followed by the appendices. So usually in the case of appendices, it will be appendix name dot Arabic number. There will be some number. Okay, there will be Arabic number for page numbering of appendix. Remember, for page numbering of appendix. This is the overall. Going to this contents. Going to the contents part. So contents part, expanding this contents part. So contents part will have list of tables, list of figures, abbreviations, nomenclature, and then the chapter start. Introduction to whatever chapters you want to write up to conclusion. Okay, up to conclusion. So there will be literature review, background, after introduction. There will be mandatory things, literature review or background. So generally what happens is you will write a separate chapter for literature review, but at the same instant of time. So if your work is divided into chapters and each chapter has its own literature, there also you can review the literature. You will not write a separate chapter for literature review. So, but if your work is a unit, and your work is derived from some literature, chapter by chapter. That means one chapter is an enhancement of another chapter. Next chapter is an enhancement of the previous chapter. Then in that case, you can write a separate literature review. Otherwise, if you can include this literature review as part of each chapter also. So there will be methodology chapter, how you are doing, and then results you will be presenting separately, and then the discussion. So these are to be maintained as separate chapters. Results and discussion, it's better you separate, or otherwise you can include discussion also part of the results. But remember, discussion or analysis is the most important part. To be frank, it's the most important part. You have to include it. Whether it is a separate chapter or as part of the results, doesn't matter, but you have to include it. Followed by references and then appendices. Order of writing chapters. This is where most of the people go wrong. Usually we think that we have to first write the abstract, and then we'll write the introduction chapter, and then literature review. You try to follow some sequence, but it's wrong method. Whenever you are writing a thesis, whenever you are writing a paper also, so this is the order in which you have to do it. First write literature review, then write methodology, after that results, discussion, conclusion, and then write introduction and abstract, This is the order in which you have to write. So note this order. Coming to individual details, abstract usually should be 4 to 8 paragraphs. So some people write only 2-3 paragraphs, they will close it, or they will write one page, total page, no paragraphs. So it has to be avoided. And some people may start writing 4-5 pages. Remember, it's not correct. So you usually try to limit it to 4 to 8 paragraphs. So 4 paragraphs may not be sufficient in the case of Ph.D. In case of M.Tech, it's okay. But for Ph.D, 4 to 8 paragraphs or 10 paragraphs, depending on your requirement. Maybe at least 2 pages, maximum of 3 pages is recommended. 300 to 400 words is recommended. Try to follow good spacing, maybe 1.5 line spacing. Be explicit here. So no assumptions or no assumptions. So try to be explicit, state everything explicitly. And usually abstracts do not contain any citations, don't cite here. So use numbers wherever appropriate. As an engineer, if you are doing work other than engineering related work, then probably you may write it in a theoretical fashion. But as an engineer, you have to quantify. Okay, you got some results. What is the betterment? 10%, 20%? That you have to indicate. That you have to clearly indicate. Quantify. As an engineer, we should learn to quantify. So answer the following questions in the abstract. What did you do? Why you did it? How you did it? What are the results? What did you learn? Why does it matter? That means why the results matter. These are the questions to be answered in the abstract. What did you do? Usually start with the background and then write actually why you have to do something, background, and then why, what are the limitations, etc. What you have done, what is the process or procedure or methodology that you have adopted, and what are the results you have obtained. Usually measure results only as part of the abstract. What are the results you have obtained, and then what are the significance of those results? What are the implications? That you have to write as part of the abstract. Introduction should generally contain as a first part a background. Background means what is necessary to understand your work. what is necessary to understand your work, that you have to write. So other things which are not relevant to your work or general things, try to avoid. So usually people write some nonsense here which is not related to their work. Write background which is related to the work, and which is necessary to understand your work. Should definitely cite previous research in the area. Ph.D. research should be cited. Who are the persons who have started doing research? What are the directions they have followed, etc. Ph.D. work that people are going to check. That you have to cite. You also cite those who have done the most recent and relevant work. That you have to cite. So that means you are following the literature also. That you have to prove. Should cite the work which is the most recent. In case of publication, in case of paper, what you have to do is basically try to find out the editors, or some people who have frequently published and who can be peer reviewers, etc. Try to cite their work here. Include their work here also. So your chances of getting published will increase. What are the limitations of existing work? You have to write why more work is necessary. What is the motivation? You have to write. The work cited should be relevant to your work. So don't cite unnecessary work. What is the purpose of study and significance? Scope of your work. What you are doing, what you are not doing. Existing work may have many limitations. You cannot solve all the problems. So what you are doing, what you are not doing, that you have to mention. Otherwise, you get some suggestions or some queries which are difficult to answer, which you cannot fulfill because they don't come under the scope. But if you have not included this section scope, then people may ask irrelevant questions also, which are not related to the work. The scope of the work is to be stated, what you are doing, what you are not doing. Problem statement and objectives. These are the most important part, and 80% of the people don't state them clearly. So remember, problem statement is problem statement. So remember, it is a statement. Refer to the dictionary for the meaning of the statement. So it is a problem statement. Problem statement is what you are doing. Objectives are how you are doing, how the work you have done will fulfill the goal. That is how you eventually fulfilling the objectives will result in solving the problem. What is problem statement? How you are doing it is objectives. But don't include I have done the literature review, I have gone through the literature, I have compared, etc. They are not objectives. So what you are doing, and what way you are contributing to the existing body of the knowledge, that you have to write. You have to write. So one beautiful definition is given by the MIT definition of problem statement. You can follow it as it is. So 3 parts are given, but remember, try to make it as a 1 sentence or 2 sentences, maybe maximum of 3 sentences. Don't write history. Problem formulation is different from problem statement. So usually problem formulation, for certain things you have to formulate the problem. Usually for mathematics related, you have to formulate the problem. That should be separated. A statement is a statement. What you have to include in that statement, if possible, in a 1 sentence, the problem itself is stated clearly and with enough contextual detail to establish why it is important. What is the problem? Why it is important? So you have to play the trick, play with the English language here. Okay, what you are solving, what is the problem, why it is important, method of solving the problem, you have to include, And the purpose, statement of objective and scope of the document the writer is preparing, that should also be included. All should be merged and given as one statement. They should be merged. As far as possible, they should be merged. Okay, they should be merged. So after merging, you try to write the problem statement. Remember, it takes time. Usually people are in a hurry, they think that the statement is that means 1 or 2 sentences. So just write like that. You write it several times, you modify it, try to go through this definition, try to understand it carefully. Ensure that all these are part of your problem statement. In order to reach the problem solution, a number of objectives are to be formulated. Each objective we can say is a sub goal of the project. Objectives should be formulated in such a way that fulfilling the objectives leads to the overall solution. So there should be a mapping from the objectives to the overall solution. That should be carefully done. Problem statement specifies what and objective specify how. Literature review is the examination of the research that has been conducted in a particular field of study. It's the previous work that is done. So present the literature from the problem context. Depending on what you are solving, you have to do the literature review. The problem context is essential while writing the literature review. And you have to do what is called as critical analysis. Critical analysis of the work is to be done. That means both positives and negatives are to be identified. Critical analysis, in-depth analysis, that you have to do. It is done to create a rationale or justification for your study. Why you have to do the critical analysis means you are identifying the limitations, and then based on that one you are doing the work. So it is done to create a rationale or justification for your study. Methodology, it varies depending on your area. You may do experimental study, you may do survey type of study, you may do simulation, you may do both, you may do purely mathematical modeling. After doing mathematical modeling, you may do the simulation or experimentation. So depending on it, you have to clearly mention the methodology that is followed. So in simple terms, the hardware which you have used, the software which you have used, how you have done the simulation, what are the metrics you have used for measuring the performance, any tools which you have used, all these things are to be mentioned as part of methodology. Clearly state the assumptions, if any. Here clearly state the assumptions. Results are the actual statements of observations. So draw the tables, draw the figures, graphs, etc. that you do it. Okay. So try to mention any observations here. Remember, discussion or analysis is a separate section or chapter. So here in the results part, you can mention the observation. Observations anybody can mention. Actually, if you look at the graph, they can infer something, so they can be considered as observations. Why? If you answer why question, that becomes a discussion or analysis part. So here, what you can observe from the graphs, tables, etc. So remember, you may get positive results, sometimes negative results, so both are to be mentioned. Tables or figures are to be mentioned, and try to break up your results into logical segments. Whenever you draw the graphs, tables, etc., figures, you don't forget to mention what is on the x-axis, what is on the y-axis, what are the column names, what are the units, what you are drawing, if it is a bar chart, what each bar chart represents. Try to clearly mention them. So usually people draw them, they don't edit them, unless some unnecessary details will be there, you have to remove it. Some details have to be added, you have to add them. They should be clear, visible. It should be clear, visible. Remember, examiners are usually 50 plus people. They have their own eyesight related issues. If you use small font, if you use small graphs, then they may not be visible. So it works negatively for you. So it should be clearly visible. So it should be clearly visible in the printout. In the printout, please note that. Critical analysis of your work has to be done as part of the discussion or analysis. That means you have to critically analyze your own work also. Literature review, you have done the critical analysis of others' work, but here you are doing the critical analysis of your own work. You should not try to give more positives or more negatives. So usually sometimes people also tend to be negative. Avoid it. Both positive and negatives are to be mentioned. Both positives and negatives are to be mentioned. So these negatives are in a way is a scope for further work or future work. So what you have to mention, what are the major patterns in your observations? What are the exceptions to these patterns? Usually exceptions will happen. Try to identify them, try to mention them, try to find justification for them. Try to find justifications for them. Is there agreement or disagreement with the previous work? In what way your work is different? What are the inferences? What are the inferences that you have to mention? There is the most important part. Conclusion, as part of conclusion, you have to answer what is called as so what. So what questions? Okay, you have got the results. So what? In what way it helps? In what way it helps? That you have to clearly mention as part of the conclusion. You don't describe totally the results. Results you have already described. So here you have to briefly mention the results, but you have to answer the what is called as so what. So what? Conclusion should also put your results into a wider context. Into a wider context. And also you have to mention future directions. So these are all mandatory. References you have to mention. Strictly you have to follow. For a book, give the name of the author, title of the book, publisher, edition and year of publication. For journal, try to include volume number, issue number, and also page numbers. Similar is the case with the conference. Try to include the location. Try to expand the conference name. Don't try to give it in the abbreviated form. Month and year of publication also should be mentioned. So the main point here is the total information you have to mention, including DOI. You have to mention. Total information has to be mentioned. Okay. For a thesis, give the name of the authors, the nature of the thesis, department, university, etc. For a web page, try to include when you refer to it, where it is available, when you refer to it, date and time. It's better you mention, because usually sometimes what happens is in the case of web page, they might have moved it, they may delete it. So it's better you mention it. While finalizing the thesis, check whether it is available or not. Mention those things. Each reference in the thesis must be cited in the body of the thesis. That you should not forget. So each reference should be cited in the body of the thesis. Cite means you will write in the square brackets, or there are other notations also. Okay, this paragraph is based on what is done in that paper. So you can add your own observations. Critical analysis are to be added. We just mentioned the authors have done so and so. It's not enough. Okay, the authors have done so and so. But what are your perspectives, your views, that you have to mention. Cite it. References can be mentioned in the alphabetical order or in the order of citation. Alphabetical order or in the order of citation. Unless mentioned by the university, try to mention them in the order of citation. There are different style manuals which you can follow. Chicago Manual of Style is there. And for citing, you can follow APA style. MLA handbook is also there. You can download these things. But the main point here is all the references are to be cited or to be mentioned in the references section also using the same style. Consistency should be there. Don't change the styles as you like. For most of the papers, etc., you can go to the Google Scholar. There will be one option. You type the title of the paper. So the paper will be listed there. At the bottom, there will be an option called as cite at the bottom. So click it. You can find different styles there. So you can use those things. But consistency should be there. So this is regarding the thesis format. So what are the contents? So there will be minor variation depending on your area, but in general, that is the thesis format. Order of writing the chapters for a thesis, for a publication is also important. Try to write them, because your thesis, your paper will be evaluated based on usually first abstract, conclusion, and then introduction. So people have to get satisfied with those three sections. If they are not satisfied with those three sections, they are not going into this result section, etc. So thank you for joining. So meet in the next session. Publish